Welcome to this video on Adobe Camera Raw. The subject here is the hue, saturation and luminance sliders, HSL for short, plus the targeted adjustment tool. Both of these are one and the same thing, we just apply them in a different way. We can use these tools as part and parcel of our global image editing. But they're one of those tools where we can also think of them as strategic too. They almost have a foot in both camps. The targeted adjustment tool within Adobe Camera Raw allows us to make a number of changes to our image simply by clicking and dragging on that image. It allows us to target a particular color too, hence the name of the tool. Our color images are made up of three channels: red, green and blue. Now it's the mixing of the different levels or shades of color within each of those which creates our color images. So to adjust green, for example, we often require a change to both yellow and green, and this is where the targeted adjustment tool is often useful. Let's look first at the hue, saturation and luminance adjustments from the icons just below the histogram, because the targeted adjustment tool uses these very same sliders. So if we go up to the top and towards the left, here's the option we want. The tooltip says HSL Adjustments. When I click this, we'll see the adjustments open up, and as you can see, we've got three different tabs here, one for hue, one for saturation and one for luminance, and within each of these we've got 8 sliders. Now I've often said that this gives us 24 ways to screw up our images. Now I'm joking, of course, but what makes any joke funny is that element of truth. Now there's going to be thousands of ways the hue, saturation and luminance sliders along with the targeted adjustment tool can be used. It rather depends on the image content and the color, plus your own personal color preferences for that particular image. Now as you can see with the change of image on screen, I've decided to use this one to demonstrate the hue, saturation and luminance adjustments. One of the things I found with my own camera, whether it's got a slight bias in this area, I'm sure it has because I notice it quite a bit. When I'm manipulating images, sometimes the blue sky doesn't look entirely convincing. Now I've also said that when we change the hue with regard to color, we're generally doing a corrective edit, whereas maybe saturation, and in this case luminance too, we could say that that is a bit more creative. In other words, one's corrective and one's more personal choice. But what I'm going to do here is to select the hue tab. What I tend to do is to come down to the blue slider here, and I usually move it to the right about +8. Now often I use a different method to do this. I sometimes just put my cursor into the box. You can see the cursor flashing because I can just nudge my up arrow and I can go straight to +8. Sometimes using these sliders we keep drifting one way or another. Now the effect of moving the blue slider here will be different depending on the image and the conditions at the time. But generally if I go a little too far, and I'll do that deliberately for a moment, then of course we start to drift towards that mauve color, and clearly the sky is wrong. So we need to be right on the edge, and as I said, it appears to me for my particular camera to be somewhere around +8, give or take 1 or 2, but I find the blue color is now much better. But of course if I then did require saturation of the blue, I can go to the saturation tab, I can go to the blue and I can move it to the right, and I can increase the saturation just a little bit, but solely of the blue, nowhere else. I could do the same with the warm tones down here, but I think they're about right. I could also go to the luminance and once again go back to the blues and maybe keep the blue the same color density but darken the sky a little bit. Or in fact, if it was necessary, lighten it a little bit, and as you can see, we've got quite a bit of opportunity here for creative adjustment. Now if I were to go up and select the Hue tab, I could maybe select the yellows here, and if I move the slider to the right, if you look at the top of the tree on the right hand side, you can see how I can make more of the green. But if you just move your eyes down to the bottom, of course, then that is also going to change the yellow color at the bottom too. And I suppose that's what I mean when I said earlier on that this tool could be considered a global editing tool, or maybe a strategic one, because it's been pretty strategic with the blue but not quite so much with the green, because there's other content below here which will be affected by the slider we'd need to use. Now with another image on screen, let's turn our attention to the targeted adjustment tool, which is way up on the top left of the screen, just to the left of the crop tool. But before I do that, this may be a good opportunity to just draw your attention to that histogram. Remember when we was talking about histograms, we was talking about using them as a guide. So here we've got another example, I think, where the histogram is all stacked up on the left hand side. Well, we can see when we view the image why that is, but we can start to learn the correlation between the two. It's a naturally dark image, but we can also see we do have a reasonably good spread of tones, and we've certainly got no burnout on the right and no blocked up shadows on the left. Anyway, back to the targeted adjustment tool. So I'm going to whiz up to the top left. This is the tool we're looking for, targeted adjustment tool, and when I click and hold we have a number of changes we can make. The parametric curve, if I select it, is the one on the right hand side, but I'm going to avoid this because I think we can demonstrate this tool just using the color a little bit better. And there you can see hue, saturation and luminance. So here I'm going to go straight to saturation. Look what happens on the right hand side when I select that. We've got exactly the same three tabs that we had a few moments ago. But now I can affect change simply by clicking and dragging. Let's assume then, just for a moment, that I'd like to take away some of the blue in the dark areas. If you look around here, you've got a bit of a blueness around all of the highlights, so I could click in there, drag to the left, and if you look over to the right, you can see I am actually taking away the blue saturation. And if I go to the right, of course, I can enhance it just by simply clicking and dragging on that particular color. So here it's working pretty strategically, I would suggest, because it's just attacking the blue. But now we've got a different color down here, and it's in a strong position on the image, and it's something we'd want to draw attention to. So if I click on that and drag to the right, you can see that this involves changing two colors, orange and yellows. But of course it does enable me quickly and easily to make quite an effective change to just that one part. So here I have a completely different image on screen. I've made just one or two changes to this. I've tweaked the exposure very slightly. I've added some blacks. I think that's probably not quite right. Let's back the exposure off and drop the blacks back a little bit. I've got some clarity and I've got some vibrance, but nothing else. But the green is overpowering, so this is where I may turn to the targeted adjustment tool. So let me fly up to that top left and select it, and I need to select saturation, and there you can see them open on the right. Now this is why I say that this can be a strategic editor or even a global editor, because what I'm going to do here is click and drag the greens, and I can go quite a long way with that. don't think I want to go quite that far, somewhere around there, but of course it's affecting the greens on the right hand side as well. You can see that if you look at the right bottom corner. So when I take the green off, I've got to get to a point where I think it's about right, and I think something like that. But then I could try to enhance the pink of the pig by doing that, clicking on its nose for example, clicking to the right, and you can see purples and magentas moving. Maybe over here, look, you can see now reds and oranges to some degree, so I could push up the colour a little bit there using the targeted adjustment tool. Now I suppose I could go on all day bringing up images to demonstrate where we may use the hue, saturation and luminance sliders or via the targeted adjustment tool, but I think you've probably got a good idea of how it works now. So just to bring this video to a close, one more example here which strikes me that it could do with maybe just a little less exposure here, maybe a little more clarity, give it a bit more punch. But what I'd like to do is to go up to the targeted adjustment tool and we'll look at saturation here. The blue sky looks okay to me, it's rather dark, but that's being influenced by the light buildings here, but I could maybe click on the yellow part of the building there to make a bit more of the colour of the yellow just in that area. But the main area I wanted to target was the green, because I think that's quite a nice part of the image right in the front there. So I'll click on that, move that to the right, and as you can see we can really make that green vivid on screen just using click and drag. But just a final thought, I suppose it's also possible to go to the luminance and the blues, and if I felt the sky was a little too dark for what I wanted, then I can just raise it up here, look, just to lift it a little bit to finish the image.